So fortunately, creativity hasn't triggered relapse for me, but I do appreciate that for a lot of you out there, being authentic and trying to do your own creative thing when new in recovery can be quite stressful. It can put a lot of strain on our own sanity, our own mental health, our own recovery journey. And today I want to talk a little bit about that, because on my own journey and in my own experience as a creative person in recovery, there have been times where I've been very close to relapse, and I feel very grateful that I haven't. And I just want to unpack some of that a little bit for you, and hopefully we can find some common ground, and some of the things that I talk about are going to be useful. The first thing I want to talk about is the stress of trying to make it as a creative person in recovery. When you're new into recovery, when we're new into recovery, we've got a lot to deal with. We've got to deal with like this whole new way of being, this whole new lifestyle, this whole new mind, essentially, that is no longer clouded by mind-altering substances. And navigating that is really tricky, particularly if we want to pick up our creativity. I know a lot of you out there asking questions about this sort of stuff are really wondering how they're going to keep the creative spark going when they're in recovery, what they're going to do without the drink and the drugs. And so to live authentically in our own creative selves when we're new in recovery, but generally, full stop, it's really hard. It is really stressful. There's no two ways about it. It's going to be challenging. It's going to test you in ways that your recovery on its own wouldn't. When I was early in recovery, I was challenged a lot with, and I still am to these days. I talk about it a lot with feelings of shame, with feelings of less than, with feelings of low self-worth, with feeling inadequate, or just comparing myself to other people generally. And I made a video about that recently, about how I still do that to this day. And I know that you lot out there, if you are new to recovery, or even several years on your own recovery journey, it is stressful. There's a lot to contend with. But I want to get on to why the stress doesn't necessarily need to lead to relapse. Because in my experience, I think I had a lot of safeguards in place and a lot of structures in place that stopped me from relapsing when the going did get really tough. So I do want to touch on those a little bit later. For me, staying grounded has been essential. And I don't mean that in an airy-fairy way. There are some very practical things that we can do to stay grounded when we're early in recovery, as creative people in particular. The biggest one for me, hands down, has been community. It's been finding other like-minded people, who actually understand where I've been, who understand where I want to go as a creative person. And, it's hard to find community at first. As I've talked about before, and you might have experienced it yourself, when we start to look for community, there are a lot of spaces out there for people in recovery. And there are a lot of ways to get involved with creative spaces too. But I found there was a bit of a lack for spaces that target creative people in recovery, which of course is why I've made my community, and I do talk about it, and I'll talk about it at the end as well. For me, community is key. If you feel like you're on your own, and if you feel like nobody gets you, if you feel like people don't understand where you're coming from, then not only life, but recovery, creativity, trying to be the person you want to be is going to be exponentially more difficult than it would be if you had community around you, because I've done both. I've been in active addiction completely isolated. I've been in active addiction surrounded by like-minded addicts and other, people that used to like to party. And I've been in recovery on my own, and I've also been in recovery with people around me. And hands down, the best I've ever felt, the most connected I've ever felt, the furthest away from relapse and returning to those old behaviours that I've ever felt is in recovery with community around me, practicing creativity and challenging myself gently, over time. So it is stressful to make as a creative person in recovery. We do need some stuff around us, otherwise the likelihood that we may fail is greater. All these things that we need around us, there's a lot to unpack there, and you know, if you are interested to know more, let me know in the comments, because I can really break this down into, you know, many different layers of meaning about what's worked best for me. But for this video, I'm going to stick to community and some of the safeguards that I've got in place, which, so community for me is like a principle, I suppose, an overarching principle, and it's one that I think you should adopt as well. Definitely, as addicts in recovery, we need that community. You know, it's kind of like one of my key pillars now to stay safe and sane. But I think like a safeguard is a more actionable and practical step that I can take, and you can take, and we as addicts in recovery, creative people, can take to stay connected, to stay sane, to stay safe as well. So the first one is physically connecting with other addicts, you know, and it's one thing to have community, but it's another thing to actually be connected to the people in that community. A lot of the spaces that I'm in, you know, it's really recommended for people to get involved, get stuck in, be helpful when you can, and really try and get to know people, as difficult as it may be. You know, I'm definitely not that great at making real friends straight off the bat, you know, particularly when my mental health is not very good, or when I don't feel like I'm the best version of myself. I can be very introverted, very isolating. I can isolate myself. And so taking these little steps towards really connecting authentically with people is super important, and it always has been for me. You know, 5.5 years into this journey, it took me a while to get going with that connection thing, but since then, you know, I speak to other addicts on the phone a few times a week. You know, I have go-to people that I can ring and people I text every morning just to say hello, check in with them. I also go to a lot of groups and connect with people physically as well. But I'm also making this step now towards this like online space, which I've touched on, you know, called Creating Sobriety. And this is me trying to create a space that I want, as well as a space that I think that is useful for really you lot as well, you know, other people who are creative in recovery. And really it's like, it's that Venn diagram. It's where the spaces of recovery and the spaces of creativity meet in the middle. That's where Creating Sobriety really is. It's an open space for people to discuss. You know, you can get whatever you want off your chest. You can talk about how your day's going, or just share where you're at in your own creative journey. It can be deep, it can be light, it can be happy, sad, funny. It doesn't matter. The important thing is that this space exists, and it does have a function for people who want to use it. So yeah, connection is super important. Being part of bigger community, important, but being really connected to individuals within that community is another step in the right direction that has stopped me from relapsing. For sure, it has, you know. Daily routine is something I'm big on, you know, I keep banging on about it, and obviously everyone goes on about it, and it's not to say you have to do 500 things every morning, far from it, but I think some sense of structure is really important. In my own experience, I like to do a little bit of meditation, not an hour or anything, just 15, 20 minutes. Or I say a few prayers, set my intentions for the day. Otherwise, I just try and stay away from my phone, you know. Another safeguard is taking personal time away. So now I'm speaking explicitly to people who are interested in being creative practitioners as you know, a way to make money or a part of their income. And I think like it's super important to take time away from that space as well, because I know in my own experience as someone who's in recovery, I do get like really obsessed with anything that I can get my hands on, and you know, it doesn't always work out for the best. So taking space away from the high energy, you know, demand of a creative practice, which in my case is like oil painting and drawing, but in your case it might be poetry, writing, music, dance, theatre, whatever it is. It's important to get space away from that, you know. I'm big on this kind of like conversation between thinking and doing, and how they are two separate processes. And for me, like doing stuff in the studio has to be counterbalanced by thinking about things away from that space. So yeah, there are a few things that have really helped me, you know, avoid relapse, stay connected with other addicts, you know, and a couple of things that I do in the morning. The final thing I want to touch on is that authentic living, you know, as a creative person in recovery has been really challenging for me because, you know, I don't really like showing my true colours very often. I try to as best as I can, but, you know, there's still a few layers between me and the outside world, and I know that that's very common for people in recovery. And if you feel the same way, then, you know, absolutely, it can feel risky. But I think, you know, you've got to keep chipping away at it slowly. It's the only way to build a life that you're really happy with. It's been my experience, and it continues to be my experience. As challenging as this life that I'm building for myself is, it's the most deeply satisfying, you know, for my soul. And I wouldn't really want it any other way, I don't think. So yeah, to finish, if you are navigating early recovery as a creative person, or if you're a little bit further on in your journey and you're trying to navigate your professional side of life as a creative person, come and join the community. Why not? You know, there's a few of us in there now, which is nice, because that validates to me that it's not just a crazy idea that nobody is interested in. But it would be good to see some more people there. So if you feel so inclined, the link will be in the description. And as always, like, if you've benefited from this, if you've got any thoughts on what I've talked about, if it makes sense, let me know. If it doesn't make sense, give me a comment and let me know, because I'm, as per usual, trying to tighten up the structure a little bit, trying to be more concise in what I say, and I have a tendency to go off topic quite a lot, so I'm still undecided about whether I want to rein that in or not, because I do kind of like having these like minimal notes, you know. So yeah, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.